I'll just very quickly give you a quick rundown. Gail was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, joining the Passionist Nuns in 1982, and has undertaken master's degrees in Christian spirituality and clinical psychology. As Gail will tell you, she was mentored for many years by the late Thomas Berry, a Passionist priest and eco-theologian who was instrumental in shaping the Catholic ecology movement. In 1999, Gail began the process of establishing Green Mountain Monastery in Vermont, co-founding it with Thomas Berry. And Gail leads a Catholic community of women dedicated to living in right relationship with our planet and supporting others in doing the same. And Gail follows a long line of religious women who for centuries have taken a prominent role in this way. And for the last 18 years, Gail has travelled the world extensively, sharing the work of Thomas Berry, dedicated to creating an awareness of the environment and a mutually enhancing human earth presence, enabling us to understand our collective evolution towards a more ecologically sustainable life. I just wanted to read you a couple of words that I found that John Wallis had written, and I think it just sits so beautifully with Gail being in front of us tonight. Father John said, "I am deeply convinced about the essential relationship between loving and knowing, between knowing and loving. The manner of knowing may change from reading or hearing, from meeting and experiencing, from meditation and illumination and revelation, but we cannot love without some kind of knowledge. With richer knowledge, we can love more." Can you please welcome Sister Gail Worcelo?
Good evening, everyone. So I would like to begin by first thanking the John Wallis Foundation and the Missionary Sisters of Service for the invitation to come here and speak to you. And I was thinking that their mission has to do with going out to the highways and the byways. And my place here tonight in interface with their mission is to push that notion of highways and byways to those further reaches of our own consciousness, not just the highways and byways of the physical country or world, but pushing ourselves out a little bit into some farther reaches of thinking. And I hope that I can be a bridge between Sherry and Johan tonight. So if you could maybe experience this as like a river that's flowing, and Sherry started the beautiful movement of the river, and then I'm stepping in to continue the flow, and then Johan will follow me, and we'll have a beautiful movement tonight of flow in consciousness. Now, my mother used to always say, when you go to a new place, don't go empty-handed, right? Did your parents or mothers tell you that? Like, always bring a gift to the house that you enter. So I brought two gifts today. The first is our maple syrup. So I come from the country of the beautiful maple trees, and it takes 50 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of the syrup. That is why we call this liquid gold. So I wish I could have brought one of these for each of you, but alas, my suitcase could not carry that much, and immigration would not approve of that. So this is going to be given to Stancia and Liz, and along with the pack of our maple candies. And it's just going to be a token of our gift for the invitation to come here. The second gift is for all of you, and it comes from the indigenous people of our land, my land, the Native Americans of my land, and I live in the northeastern part of the United States, in the state of Vermont. The peoples of that land are called the Abenaki people, and their translation is the people of the dawn. So they send this prayer to you as a prayer of blessing. And I'd like to teach you the prayer because they send it with gesture. And I'll show you the gesture, then ask you to just stand and we'll do it together. So I can transmit this from my country to your country, from our First Peoples to your First Peoples, and from all of them to all of you. And this is how it goes. It goes like this. You'll be moving like this. Can you see? I know you can't see me, but I can't move the microphone. So I am just like moving around. All that surrounds me is sacred, like that. From the earth to the heavens, from the waters to the fire, I salute all, and all is one. Okay, so if you would stand and we'll do this prayer. Okay, so all that surrounds me is sacred. You repeat after me.
All that surrounds me is sacred.
From the earth, to the heavens,
From
the waters, to the fire. I salute all, and all is one. Again, all that surrounds me is sacred. Okay, you repeat after me. All that surrounds me is sacred.
All that surrounds me is sacred.
From the earth, to the heavens, from the waters, to the fire. I salute all, and all is one. And now in silence, let's go. Thank you. So for my very short time tonight, I am going to divide my period of time into 3 sections. And this is what I'd like you to be listening for. The first section I'm calling the footprints of God. And what I'm going to be talking about here are the large-scale cosmic patterns of guidance that can help us into the future. The second part I'm calling the Ecozoic era, and it's a phrase for moving into a mutually enhancing human-earth relationship as we go into our future. And as we take the footprints of God and manifest them in our 21st century lives. And then the last part is going to focus on what Thomas Berry calls the great work. And in that he says every age has a great work, and we ourselves have a great work. So I'm just going to move around the great work in a few images of practicality, like how are we living the great work out in my place in the world. And then after that, Johan will come up and he'll continue the river. Okay. So I remember screaming at the top of my lungs, "We're moving! We're moving!" as the Staten Island ferry pulled away from the dock in the New York harbor. It was June of 1963, and my voice joined the high cacophony of 100 other little children. We were actually leaning over the railing of a boat on our way to a place called Rye Playland, which was an amusement park whose mascot and core attraction was a wooden roller coaster called the Dragon. And this place was the mecca for all little children at the time. Now, the idea of bringing 100 little children to a place of magic carpet rides and roller coaster could only come from the brave initiative of the Sisters of Mercy, who were our teachers at the school at the time. In another part of the world, on the exact same day, the Second Vatican Council was in session, and Pope John XXIII was dying. And the church itself was experiencing its own dizzying ride on the roller coaster of renewal. The scientific world, around the same time, was also experiencing a dizzying ride as the radio astronomers Penzias and Wilson, in a lab in New Jersey, discovered the background radiation of the Big Bang, giving empirical evidence for an unfolding emergent universe. And at that same time, the Hubble telescope, in which we as humans extended our eyes way out into deep time space, was born as a possibility. Now, little did I realize when I shouted those words as the ferry moved out of the dock in the New York harbor, which were what? Yeah, we are moving. That those very words were captured by the French paleontologist and Jesuit Teilhard de Chardin in a collection of essays entitled The Human Phenomenon, summing up the evolutionary spirit of our age. Now, in that book, The Human Phenomenon, Teilhard writes, the conflict dates when one man, flying in the face of appearances, goes outside and looks up at the stars and perceives that those stars are no more fixed in the sky than the cosmos itself. That the arrangement in the sky depicts the tide of a tremendous flow. And Teilhard says, that day, a voice cries out to humanity, peacefully slumbering on the raft of earth, we are moving. We are going forward. And Teilhard said, it's a dramatic spectacle, that of humanity, divided by its very depths into two irrevocably opposing camps. He said, one, looking toward the horizon and exclaiming, we, and the other, staunchly, with hands in the position, obstinately maintaining, we are not moving at all. Now, we are moving. These three words sum up the evolutionary process. Three simple words, making a seismic shift from a worldview in which we have been captivated by the spell of solidity, the fallacy of fixity, and the semblance of stasis. Now, Teilhard de Chardin was among the first in our modern era to affirm that whenever and wherever we look, things are in the process of change and unfolding. Now, it was not that way for Teilhard de Chardin, because as a child, Teilhard de Chardin, as a little scientist, looked for that which represented permanence. And he said in his book, The Human Phenomenon, that he found a piece of iron, which he called my iron genie. And he kept that piece of iron and believed that this is proof that things don't change. I found something that doesn't move. But one day he put the iron outside. After a storm, he came out, and what happened? The iron rusted. And he says, I fell to the ground and I wept bitter tears. But from that moment on, I placed my faith in that which moves. Now, in his book, The Dream of the Earth, my dear mentor, the late Passionist priest and cultural historian Thomas Berry, points out that not only are we moving, but we are moving somewhere. Where are we moving? So when I was a novice in my community of Passionists, Thomas Berry, and I'm grateful for this, asked us that question, where are we moving? What do you think? Where are we moving? Anybody? Just call it out. Forward. We don't know. The kingdom? The what?
Mysterious.
Oh, mysterious, into mystery. Or moving mysteriously.
To be transformed.
To be transformed. Anyone else? Where are we moving? To our potential. To possibility. Okay, well, that question, where are we moving to, is controversial in the fields of science and other, other arenas. But I want to bring forward something that was the most exciting idea that I think Thomas Berry spoke about when he asked us the question, where are we moving to? Where are we going? So Thomas Berry, in his reflection on where is the universe going, he was in the conviction that the universe is headed somewhere, that there is an innate direction. No, that's not exactly right. No. That there is innate directions that the universe is headed toward. And he said the universe is headed toward 3 directions. He called the directions the footprints of God, because he said these directions are present everywhere, at all times, and in all places, in the 13.8 billion year unfolding of the universe. And those directions of where the universe is heading are in the directions of differentiation, of subjectivity, and of communion. So when I shouted those words on the boat, we are moving, what those words were pointing to are we are moving in this Trinitarian, threefold, dynamic, cosmic pattern. So first, we find ourselves in a universe that is differentiated. Take a look around the room for a minute. Like, look at your neighbors. Like, the universe itself consists of differentiated centers. Let's say, we could say it another way. We could say that the universe consists of articulated energy constellations. Or, to make it simple, we could just say that we have discovered a universe that aims towards difference. Now, we actually could have discovered a universe that was homogeneous, that was large slabs of uniformity, like a homogeneous sludge. But no, each thing is different from every other thing in this universe. So we could say the universe has the tendency to move towards difference. And the greater the difference in any scene in our universe, the healthier the system. The greater the difference, the healthier the system. Let's think of the universe's beginning. So the universe begins as simple plasma. And then it differentiates into trillions of galaxies. Or we could look at Earth itself. Earth begins as molten rock. Then over time, it differentiates into mountains, rivers, valleys, and billions of forms of life. So we get this felt sense that there is an irrepressible desire on the part of the universe to always give birth to something new and different. Let's look at subjectivity. Now, subjectivity is a little difficult to grasp, but it means that the universe, simply put, consists of subjects. Now, when we say the universe consists of subjects, we're talking about the interior dynamism of things, so that everything that exists has an inside, a sacred depth. You, me, the sun, the stars, the animals, we all have agency or subjectivity to make ourselves, to become ourselves. So the scientific word for this is autopoiesis, or self-poem. So you can think of subjectivity as a self-poem. It's the capacity and the desire to become what we are. And each being in the universe has this impulse to become the fullness of what it is, a self-poem, a self-creation. So to be a subject is to be a space where the universe is acting. So in this universe, each being has its own interior articulation and carries its own subjective depth. So we could say that in its subjective depths, the numinous mystery from which the universe emerges into being is represented in the subject. Another way of saying it, subjectivity, self-poem. Every being in the universe strives to give birth to what it is. It wants to become what it is. And lastly, communion. Communion as a direction of the universe. To be is to be in relationship with all. To be is to be related. So that we could say that the universe is a communion of differentiated subjectivities. The universe is a constant communion, right, of the differentiated subjectivities of which it is composed. So each of these three foundational laws are the cosmic grammar. So when we say, where are we going? We're moving towards difference, towards subjectivity, and towards communion. So difference is the truth in this universe. In this universe, we're in a place that consists of subjects, not objects. And lastly, we're in a universe that is a communion experience continually taking place within a multiplicity of beings, of sacred beings. So the ultimate aim, when we ask, well, where are we really going? Where are we going in the 21st century? Where are we going in our lives, in our communities, in our workplaces, in our countries? If we're working in line with the three principles or the footprints of God, we're moving towards the greatest differentiation that we can handle. We're moving towards the deepest subjectivity that we could bear. And we're moving towards the most intimate communion that our humanity is capable of holding. So as we emerge in our 21st century, our future emergence and our present emergence will necessarily need to place us all at the center of these principles. So I'm wondering, where are the principles pulling you? And how deeply have you internalized those principles? And ask yourself, where am I? Where are you in violation of any of those principles in your own lives? Let's look at this. Differentiation. We're now opening up to multicultural differentiation, religious differentiation, earth differentiation, And now gender differentiation. We're also opening up to critiquing monocultures. If the universe moves towards differentiation, then what about our agricultural systems that are complete monocultures? What about our elderly resident care, where you have all monoculture, all elderly people in one place, monoculture? Is that healthy? So we're asking ourselves these questions inside of the differentiation. Where are you moving to? Where is your place inside of the differentiation? So we all are asking ourselves how we're moving deeper into the questions of differentiation. Subjectivity. What about the subjects? What about the animals that land on our dinner plates? How are those animals treated inside of the subjectivity? What about our products, our shampoos, and our cleaning products that are tested on the eyes of animals? Animal testing, animal cruelty. How are we supporting subjectivity in that regard? What about women, the indigenous? What about our oceans? We could go on, looking at the subjectivity of the beings with whom we share the planet. We are so far from living inside of these principles. So far. And communion. Communion. We share the global commons with the totality of our Earth community. And we're faced with a destruction of communion that's even more incomprehensible than we can bear when we think of ecological sacrifice zones like Chernobyl and Fukushima. And when we think about chemicals going into our DNA, altering the genetic memory of our foods, of our bodies, DNA being altered that will affect generations into the future. So for just a moment, I'd like you to maybe just close your eyes for a moment and just take the principles in. Those three principles: differentiation, interiority, subjectivity, and communion. Okay, now I'd like you to just take a moment to just buzz a little bit with the person next to you within the range of these questions. So here are the questions I'd really like you to think about. Question one, not necessarily, you could just fall into one of the questions, but what are the places you are being invited into when it comes to difference? What are the places you might be being invited into when it comes to the differentiation and opening up to more difference? Secondly, what are the new places you are being invited into when it comes to honoring subjectivity in a world that has objectified so much and so many? And lastly, communion. What are the new unions forming in your life? Are you noticing any new unions that might be forming in your life? So just for about 2 minutes, let's buzz a little bit on the questions as they might be moving in you right now. Okay, now let's come back. So I wanted to move from the principles of differentiation, interiority or subjectivity, and communion, and segue that into what Thomas Berry referred to as ecozoic, the ecozoic era. And in his book entitled The Great Work, Thomas Berry said that every age has a great work, and that the great work of our time is moving from a destructive presence to a mutually enhancing presence on the overall planet. And when he talks about that movement, he's talking about, again, moving in the direction of heightened respect for difference, honoring the sacredness of other, and moving towards deeper relationality. And he looks at that primarily through our major institutions of economics, religion, jurisprudence, and education. But I wanted to just bring that word in as the second part, ecozoic. So Thomas Berry posed the challenge and invitation to invite us to enter into what he called the ecozoic era. And the root of eco from the Greek oikos means household, and the root of zoa in Greek is life. So to enter into our common home, to care for our global commons, our house of life, a house of reverence. Thomas Berry urged us to move forward into a new communion consciousness of the whole, a consciousness that's integral, a house of life. And Thomas Berry situated that word ecozoic, eco, household, zoa, life, within the history of large-scale Earth unfolding. So we have the early Earth, which is the Paleozoic, and then the Middle Earth, which is the Mesozoic, and then the later Earth, which is the Cenozoic, which is the last 65 million years of Earth unfolding. So Thomas refers to the Cenozoic as the last 65 million years of Earth unfolding. It's a time that scientists call the lyric period, when wave after wave of life appeared in all its magnificence, making way for our arrival as humans. It's the era that prepared the way for our emergence, where we emerge, of course, at the end of the Cenozoic period. So he poses this as a cultural historian and a historian of Earth, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic, and then refers to our next emergence as either moving into Ecozoic or Technozoic. So basically moving into a way in which the principles of differentiation, interiority, and communion are manifested in our Earth community, in our humanity, or a destruction of that. So Thomas Berry was fond of saying, if we lived on the moon, everything about us would reflect the lunar landscape. We would be a little rocky. It would be our poetry, our music, our capacities to relate would be lunar, our little loony. And but we live on the Earth. We live on a flowering planet, a good gift planet that feeds our souls with its music, its poetry, its celebration. So in every phase of our imaginative, aesthetic, emotional lives, we're profoundly dependent upon the larger community of life. And without that community of life, we suffer a corresponding soul loss. Thomas Berry points out that we're at the end of the Cenozoic and we're faced with a challenge, just as Pope Francis points out in his encyclical Laudato Si, that we'll either enter this house of life and go into the future as a single sacred community, or we will perish on the way, in a sense. The Ecozoic period, I think, is a period of alignment. And I have a love of spines, and I brought my spine with me. I have a love of spines, and I think that as an image of what Thomas means by Ecozoic era, it's something like this, that in a spine, in the building up of a spine, the more complex development of the spine is dependent upon the lower levels of development. So when we get to this part of the spine, we're actually in a place of greater complexity, however dependent on the fundamental basis of the spine. The spine has 33 individual bones that interlock with each other, but it's designed to protect the spinal cord. And the spinal cord is a column of nerves that connects our brains and the rest of our body, allowing us to control our movements. So the spinal cord is a superhighway, an information highway. The spine could actually hold 2,000 pounds if we were to put that on there. So as a metaphor for the Ecozoic era, it seems to me that also that the curve of the spine is like a coiled spring and is designed to absorb shock and allow motion through the spinal column. But when the spine is out of alignment, damage to the spinal cord can happen. And when damage happens to the spinal cord, things like loss in motor and sensory function are the results. So we could say maybe that the Ecozoic is a realignment of the spine of our humanity. Ecozoic is a realignment, and whenever humanity is out of alignment, it is in violation of those three principles of differentiation, interiority, and communion. So when Thomas Berry says realign, get that chiropractic adjustment, he says that we need to realign because the 21st century is out of alignment. And this is what he says. In this 21st century, the glory of the human has become the desolation of earth. He says, I'll sum it up as a cultural historian in 3 sentences. Misalignment. The glory of the human has become the desolation of earth. The desolation of earth is becoming the destiny of the human, and all human institutions, programs, and professions will be judged. Do they inhibit, ignore, or foster a mutually enhancing human-earth relationship? And just to kind of pull this to a close, what the Ecozoic is, Thomas Berry gives us several principles for entering into the Ecozoic era. So what he does is he takes those 3 governing themes, which are he names as the footprints of God, the differentiation, the subjectivity, and communion, and he puts them inside of the Ecozoic era, what the era we're entering into, a house of life. And he just has he has about 12 principles. I'm only going to name a few. So the first principle is that the universe and the earth is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. The second principle, earth is a one-time endowment. Once it's gone, it's gone. A species gone is gone. Third, new ethical principles must emerge. We understand homicide. What about biocide and geocide? Giving voice to planetary abortion or the killing of the life systems of the planet. We cannot make a blade of grass, but we have a comprehensive influence on whether or not there will be a blade of grass. And then there is the thing on rights. And Thomas Berry lists rights as a principle of the ecozoic. And he says every being has 3 rights: the right to be, the right to habitat, and the right to fulfill its role in the great community of existence. So this is a leap. This last one is a leap. They all are leaps in consciousness. Every being has rights: the right to be, the right to habitat, and the right to fulfill its role in the great community of existence. And he's getting that from the 3 principles of differentiation, applying the principles. And so this is my last point that I'd like to make regarding the ecozoic era. So Thomas Berry is talking about, in this last principle, of applying the cosmological foundations or the footprints of God to an earth jurisprudence, to a legal system where the rights of the subject or the rights of the human exist within interdependent wholes of the whole. He critiques our current jurisprudence, juridical system, because the dominant paradigm supports the human rather than the concept of supporting nature, nature itself being a rights-bearing entity, as we see from the principles. So in your own country, I was noticing that you have an Australian Center for Earth Jurisprudence. And there are people here who are actually exploring the notion of the rights of nature, and how human rights do not cancel out the rights of other beings to exist in their natural state. So I'd just like to follow up a little bit on what Sherry was saying in this regard. So when Thomas Berry's talking about rights, he says 3 things that I have been thinking about for a long time, just want to pass them on to you. The first lineup is this. He says, rights originate where existence originates. Then he goes on and says, that which determines existence determines rights. And third, he says, the natural world on planet Earth gets its rights from the same source that humans get their rights, from the universe that brought all of us into being. So I would just like to go into my third part, which is just practical applications at my own place in Green Mountain Monastery, because sometimes the practical application in its simplicity puts some flesh on the principles. So question on my end, how are we living the principles of differentiation, interiority, and communion? And Thomas Berry in 1994 wrote a paper entitled Women Religious, Their Future Role. And in that paper he said that traditionally religious communities were founded to address the needs of the human community. So we have hospitals and schools and social work, etc. And he said there's never been a community founded in the Catholic tradition to address the needs of the planet itself and the protection of Earth and its life systems. So in 1999, Thomas Berry co-founded such a community, and it's our community of Green Mountain Monastery. So I'll just show you a few slides, and then I'm going to wrap this up into a close. So just a few ways we're embodying the principles. Our mission is a single sacred community. And our sign that we wear, that I have on now, it's up here, are the principles: differentiation, subjectivity, and communion. Our focus is on the healing and protection of Earth and its life systems. And then we just do that in very practical ways. We have 5 women in our community from differentiated parts of the world. We have some from Indonesia. Our first sisters are from Indonesia, Philippines, and we have some in the wings from Africa and the United States. So already, our community is starting off inside of differentiation. We get all of our energy from solar panels. We're committed to sustainable architecture. So this is a straw bale house, and straw is a renewable resource in my part of the world. So our architecture is built with sustainable and renewable. Our current chapel is a yurt, and it's a movable structure, energy efficient. We get our heat in the cold winters of Vermont from the Russian fireplaces, and these fireplaces are energy efficient, and they do not leak toxins out into the environment because of the coiled system inside of their interiors. We are committed to organic gardening, and we serve our guests and all of us and the local soup kitchen with organic produce from our gardens. We also are dedicated to the worms. So we do vermicomposting, and we cut up newspaper and put the newspaper in the compost bins, so the worms chew up. And we love our worms because they're revolutionary. They take all the bad news and they convert the bad news to good news. We are committed to care of animals and no chemicals inside of our place. We don't want to be putting chemicals into the water system or into the soil system of our land. So we look for alternatives in terms of our shampoos, cleaning products, etc. We happen to be vegetarian in our particular place, which kind of goes in nicely with lentils, the cafe here. We also are members and co-founders. We helped co-found this food co-op, Hunger Mountain Co-op. So we are member owners of a local co-op, and it's run democratically, and we have a voice in what comes into the co-op, what farms we support, and what we're feeding our children. We cannot have healthy people on a sick planet, as Thomas Berry would say. We also don't have junk food in our monastery, so we are opposed to the Coca-Colization and the McDonaldization of the planet. We welcome guests from all over the world. We have a program called Forest Healing, One with the Forest. We are on with many groups around a number of ecological issues. And we're currently putting our land of 160 acres into a land conservation. So this land will be put into trust for perpetuity. And that happens to be a bear on our property. We had our students from the University of Vermont put cameras up all over our land, and this bear appeared in one of the camera photos. We're dedicated to music and the arts as a way of just lifting and celebrating our humanity together. Dance as social activism, and I'll be closing the evening tonight with a dance that I will dedicate to the forest of Australia. Maple syrup. We also make Christmas wreaths because we have a lot of balsam on our property. And lastly, I'll end with this icon of Thomas Berry, with the coming together of the principles. The earth is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. And lastly, Thomas Berry is buried in a meadow on our land, and the gravestone says this, quote from Thomas Aquinas: "The entire universe participates in and manifests the divine more than any single being whatsoever." So I'm going to end with a 2-minute clip of invitation of you into my place, and then I'll be followed with Johan. So. So the students of the University of Vermont sent a drone up over our acreage, and this is just a 2-minute clip to close my presentation of the drone taking photos of our place. Thank you.